The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestones of Florence as Lorenzo walked through the narrow streets, his mind heavy with the weight of recent events. He had witnessed the rise and fall of princes, the machinations of merchants, and the calculated moves of those who understood something most others remained blind to, that power was not inherited, not granted by divine right, but seized by those who comprehended the true nature of the game being played around them. In his weathered leather satchel, Lorenzo carried a manuscript that would change how humanity understood power forever. The author had spent years observing the courts of Italy, watching as some leaders flourished while others crumbled, noting the patterns that separated the victorious from the vanquished. This was not a tale of noble virtues or moral righteousness, but a cold examination of what actually worked in the brutal arena of human ambition. The manuscript bore no flowery dedication, no appeals to higher powers. Instead, it opened with a simple yet revolutionary premise, that those who succeed in the acquisition and maintenance of power do so not through adherence to conventional morality, but through understanding the fundamental laws that govern human nature and political dynamics. These were the dark secrets that separated the rulers from the ruled, the shapers of destiny from those who merely endured whatever fate brought them. The foundation of all power games. Lorenzo paused at a fountain in the city center, watching as merchants haggled over prices, nobles discussed matters of state, and common citizens went about their daily struggles. Each interaction, he realized, was a microcosm of the larger power dynamics that the manuscript described. The vendor who understood his customers' desperation could command higher prices. The noble who recognized the fears and desires of his peers could manipulate outcomes to his advantage. The citizen who grasped the true motivations of those above him could navigate the system more effectively than those who remained naive about its workings. The fundamental insight that emerged from years of observation was that power operates according to predictable patterns, regardless of the century, culture, or context. Human nature remains remarkably consistent across time and geography. People respond to the same basic stimuli: fear, greed, pride, the desire for security, the hunger for recognition. Those who understand these driving forces can predict behavior and, more importantly, influence it. The first dark secret revealed in the manuscript was that effective power is never based on what people claim to value, but on what they actually respond to. While societies profess to admire virtue, honesty, and fairness, they consistently reward those who demonstrate strength, cunning, and the ability to deliver results. The disconnect between stated values and actual behavior creates opportunities for those perceptive enough to recognize it. Consider the dynamics of any organization, whether a Renaissance city-state or a modern corporation. Leaders who focus solely on being liked, on maintaining moral purity, or on adhering strictly to stated principles often find themselves outmaneuvered by those who understand that people ultimately follow strength and success. This doesn't mean abandoning all ethical considerations, but rather recognizing that moral posturing without practical effectiveness is a luxury that those seeking real influence cannot afford. The manuscript detailed how successful power players master the art of reading situations accurately rather than viewing them through the lens of how things should be. They observe what actually motivates people, what they truly fear, what they secretly desire. They note the gap between public statements and private actions, between proclaimed loyalties and actual allegiances. This realistic assessment of human nature forms the foundation for all strategic thinking. Another crucial element of understanding the game involves recognizing that power is always relative and contextual. What works in one situation may fail catastrophically in another. The leader who succeeds through charisma in peacetime may need to adopt entirely different approaches during crisis. The merchant who thrives in a stable market must adjust his tactics when economic uncertainty creates new opportunities and dangers. Flexibility and adaptability become essential qualities for anyone seeking to maintain influence over time. The manuscript emphasized that those who become unstoppable understand that power is not a fixed resource to be hoarded, but a dynamic force that must be continuously cultivated and deployed. Like a muscle that atrophies without use, influence diminishes when not actively exercised and renewed. This requires constant attention to relationships, circumstances, and opportunities. It means never becoming complacent, regardless of current success. Perhaps most importantly, understanding the game means accepting that conflict is inevitable and that neutrality is often impossible. In any situation involving multiple parties with competing interests, remaining passive or attempting to avoid choosing sides frequently results in being crushed by those who are willing to act decisively. The manuscript noted that many well-intentioned leaders failed not because of evil intentions, but because they refused to acknowledge the reality of competition and conflict inherent in all power dynamics. The architecture of influence. As Lorenzo continued through the city, he observed a group of young nobles engaged in what appeared to be casual conversation. Yet beneath the surface pleasantries, he recognized the subtle maneuvering described in the manuscript's second section. One young man was carefully building alliances, another was gathering information, a third was positioning himself as indispensable to the others. They were unconsciously demonstrating the principles of influence architecture that separated effective power players from mere participants. The second major insight from the manuscript concerned the systematic construction of influence networks. Those who become unstoppable understand that power is rarely exercised in isolation but flows through carefully constructed webs of relationships, obligations, dependencies, and mutual benefits. Building such networks requires a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and strategic patience. The foundation of any influence network begins with the recognition that different people are motivated by different things. Some seek wealth, others crave recognition, still others desire security or excitement. The skilled power player maps these motivations carefully and positions himself as someone who can satisfy them. This creates genuine value for others while simultaneously building loyalty and dependence. However, the manuscript warned against the naive approach of simply trying to please everyone. Such attempts inevitably lead to overextension, conflicting commitments, and the appearance of weakness. Instead, successful influence builders focus on strategic relationships that provide maximum leverage with acceptable risk. They identify key individuals whose support amplifies their reach and whose opposition could create significant problems. The art of building influence also requires mastering the delicate balance between being helpful and maintaining independence. Those who make themselves too available become taken for granted, while those who remain too distant fail to build the bonds necessary for lasting influence. The optimal approach involves providing valuable assistance in ways that create ongoing relationships rather than one-time transactions. Information becomes a crucial currency in the influence game. Those who understand how power works position themselves as sources of valuable intelligence while simultaneously gathering data about others' plans, weaknesses, and motivations. This doesn't necessarily require deception or betrayal, but it does mean being strategic about what information is shared, with whom, and when. The manuscript detailed how effective power players create what might be called influence infrastructure, systems, and processes that generate ongoing advantages. This might involve establishing regular meetings that position them as central to important discussions, creating institutions that depend on their expertise, or developing reputations in specific areas that make their opinions valuable to others. One particularly sophisticated technique involved the strategic use of favors and obligations. Rather than simply accumulating debts from others, skilled influence builders create situations where people feel genuinely grateful for assistance provided at crucial moments. The key lies in timing and appropriateness. Offering help when it's most needed and least expected creates far stronger bonds than routine assistance. The manuscript also explored the psychology of group dynamics and how individuals can position themselves advantageously within organizations and social structures. Understanding informal power structures often matters more than formal hierarchies. The person with official authority may have less real influence than someone who is trusted, well-connected, and seen as effective at solving problems. Creating dependency represents another powerful tool in the influence arsenal. This doesn't mean making people helpless, but rather making oneself valuable enough that others prefer cooperation to conflict. The merchant who provides superior products at fair prices builds customer loyalty. The advisor who consistently offers valuable counsel becomes indispensable to decision-makers. The ally who proves reliable during difficult times earns lasting loyalty. Perhaps most crucially, the manuscript emphasized that building influence requires understanding and managing perception. Reality matters, but perception often matters more in determining how others respond. Those who become unstoppable learn to shape how they are viewed by others, emphasizing strengths while minimizing visible weaknesses, timing communications for maximum impact, and consistently delivering on commitments to build credibility over time. The architecture of influence also involves understanding when and how to use different types of power. Direct confrontation sometimes becomes necessary, but skilled players prefer to achieve objectives through persuasion, alliance building, and creating situations where others want to cooperate. They recognize that power exercised too obviously or too frequently often generates resistance and countermoves. The mastery of strategic deception. The afternoon light was beginning to fade as Lorenzo reached the outskirts of Florence, where he encountered a scene that perfectly illustrated the third and most dangerous set of principles contained within the manuscript. A group of mercenary captains were negotiating with city officials over terms of military service. What fascinated him was not the obvious discussion about payment and conditions, but the subtle web of deceptions, misdirections, and strategic omissions that each party employed. The city officials presented themselves as having numerous alternatives while actually facing desperate need for military protection. The mercenary leaders portrayed their forces as more numerous and experienced than reality while downplaying their own urgent need for employment. Each side carefully revealed certain truths while concealing others, creating an elaborate dance of strategic deception that would determine the final agreement. This scene embodied the most controversial yet practical insights from the manuscript, that those who achieve lasting power must master the arts of strategic deception, timing, and psychological manipulation. These skills separated true power players from those who remained victims of others' manipulation or who failed to achieve their objectives due to excessive honesty about their intentions, capabilities, and limitations. The manuscript made clear that strategic deception differs fundamentally from simple dishonesty. Random lying creates chaos and destroys credibility. Strategic deception involves carefully controlling information to achieve specific objectives while maintaining overall trustworthiness in areas that matter most. It requires sophisticated judgment about when truth serves one's interests and when selective disclosure or misdirection proves more effective. Understanding the psychology of deception begins with recognizing that people often want to be deceived, at least partially. They prefer comfortable illusions to harsh realities, optimistic projections to pessimistic assessments, simple explanations to complex truths. This creates opportunities for those who can provide what people want to hear while still achieving practical objectives. The manuscript detailed several categories of strategic deception. Misdirection involves focusing attention on secondary issues while pursuing primary objectives through different channels. A leader might publicly debate minor policy details while quietly implementing major structural changes. This technique proves particularly effective because it satisfies people's need to feel informed and involved while protecting more important initiatives from interference. Controlled revelation represents another powerful technique. Rather than concealing all information, skilled operators carefully time the release of different pieces of intelligence to create maximum advantage. They might reveal certain problems early to build credibility for later claims, or save positive developments for moments when they need to strengthen their position or distract from other issues. The art of strategic ambiguity allows power players to maintain flexibility while avoiding commitments that might later prove disadvantageous. Rather than making specific promises they might not be able to keep, they speak in terms that can be interpreted multiple ways depending on how situations develop. This isn't simple evasiveness, but careful language that preserves options while providing enough substance to satisfy immediate needs. Perhaps most importantly, the manuscript explored the psychology of impression management. People form opinions based on limited information and, then, interpret subsequent data through the filter of their initial impressions. Those who understand this dynamic work carefully to shape first impressions and, then, reinforce them through consistent signals, even when reality might be more complex. The timing of revelations and actions proves crucial to strategic effectiveness. Information delivered at the wrong moment may have no impact or even negative consequences, while the same information presented when circumstances are favorable can dramatically alter outcomes. Skilled power players develop an intuitive sense for when people are most receptive to different messages and when resistance is likely to be minimal. The manuscript also addressed the delicate balance between projecting strength and maintaining credibility. Appearing too powerful too quickly often generates alliance building among potential rivals, while seeming too weak invites challenges and exploitation. The optimal approach involves demonstrating capability selectively, allowing others to underestimate one's full potential while providing enough evidence of strength to deter casual challenges. Understanding human nature becomes essential for effective strategic deception. Most people operate with predictable biases and blind spots. they overestimate their own abilities while underestimating others, prefer information that confirms existing beliefs, focus on immediate concerns rather than long-term consequences, and respond more strongly to potential losses than equivalent gains. These patterns create opportunities for those perceptive enough to recognize and exploit them. The manuscript emphasized that strategic deception requires careful attention to maintaining plausible deniability and escape routes. The most effective practitioners ensure that their actions can be explained in innocent terms if necessary, while building their networks carefully enough that they are not overly dependent on any single relationship or strategy. However, the document also warned about the dangers of becoming too dependent on deception. Those who rely exclusively on manipulation often find their reputations eventually catch up with them, limiting their effectiveness over time. The most successful power players understand when to be genuinely transparent and helpful, using honesty strategically to build the credibility that makes their occasional deceptions more effective. The psychological toll of strategic deception also requires consideration. Maintaining multiple layers of truth and fiction demands significant mental energy and emotional discipline. Those who excel at these techniques often develop a certain detachment from conventional moral categories, viewing their actions primarily through the lens of effectiveness rather than traditional ethical frameworks. The final section of the manuscript addressed what might be called the master's paradox, that those who become truly unstoppable through understanding and applying these principles often discover that conventional measures of success, wealth, titles, recognition, lose much of their meaning. They have learned to see through the illusions that motivate most people, which can lead to a kind of existential isolation even as it provides practical power. Yet for those committed to achieving significant objectives, whether personal advancement, organizational success, or broader social change, the manuscript argued that understanding these realities becomes essential. The choice is not between moral and immoral approaches, but between naive ineffectiveness and sophisticated capability. The world operates according to certain predictable patterns regardless of whether any particular individual acknowledges them. Those who remain ignorant of these patterns become victims of those who understand them. As Lorenzo reached his destination and carefully placed the manuscript in his private study, he reflected on the profound implications of what he had read. The document offered no easy comfort, no simple moral guidelines, no reassuring platitudes about virtue being rewarded and evil being punished. Instead, it presented a clear-eyed analysis of how power actually operates in human societies, along with practical guidance for those willing to engage with these realities. The true test of these principles would come not in their theoretical understanding, but in their practical application. Those who could internalize these insights while maintaining their essential humanity, who could operate effectively within existing power structures while still pursuing worthy objectives, who could master strategic thinking without losing sight of larger purposes, these individuals would indeed become unstoppable in their chosen domains. The manuscript concluded with a sobering observation, that knowledge of these principles carries responsibility as well as opportunity. Those who understand how power works bear a greater burden for the consequences of their actions, since they cannot claim ignorance about the likely effects of their choices. With greater capability comes greater accountability, even if that accountability is primarily to oneself and one's chosen objectives rather than to conventional moral authorities. The game of power continues regardless of whether any particular individual chooses to acknowledge its rules. The only real choice lies in whether to remain a passive piece moved by others or to become an active player capable of influencing outcomes according to one's own vision and values. For those who make the latter choice, understanding and applying these dark secrets becomes not a moral failing, but a practical necessity for achieving anything of lasting significance in a world where power determines whose vision ultimately prevails. In the end, becoming unstoppable requires more than just understanding these principles, it demands the wisdom to apply them in service of objectives worthy of the effort and cost involved. The tools of power are morally neutral, their value lies entirely in the purposes for which they are employed and the skill with which they are wielded. Those who master both the techniques and their proper application find themselves capable of shaping reality according to their will, limited primarily by their imagination, persistence, and the ultimate objectives they choose to pursue. The manuscript's final pages suggested that true mastery comes not from perfect execution of these techniques, but from understanding when to employ them, when to refrain, and how to maintain one's essential character while operating effectively in a world governed by these ancient and enduring patterns of human behavior. This balance, between effectiveness and integrity, between strategic thinking and authentic relationships, between understanding the game and remaining worthy of victory, represents the ultimate challenge for anyone seeking to become unstoppable through genuine wisdom rather than mere cunning. As night fell over Florence, Lorenzo understood that he possessed knowledge that would forever change how he viewed human interactions, political dynamics, and the possibilities available to those willing to see clearly and act decisively. The question now was not whether these insights were true, their accuracy was evident in every successful power player throughout history, but rather how to apply them in ways that would create the kind of world he actually wanted to live in.